Okay. Okay, so Susanna's going to help me manage the wait room if additional people come in and join. I am going to drop a guide into the chat. Um, this is a guide that should be helpful in terms of understanding how to use the different filters and all the different options. This session is only going to cover some of the things. So the guide is going to be your more comprehensive of understanding all of the different aspects. And if you have any questions, just go ahead and unmute, ask your question. You can drop things in the chat. Susanna and I are going to be tag teaming this as we go through. Okay. Let me start screen sharing. Okay, are you all seeing the PowerPoint, and did the file that I dropped in the chat come through?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right, so this is sort of the rundown of what we are going to be covering today. This is really focused for counselors and case management, but instructional faculty absolutely can learn from this as well, because they can use filters and maybe look at things in different ways with their courses. But the scenarios that we have in here are much more focused on things that counselors are often needing to identify and work towards with managing our caseloads and the different counseling related projects that we work on. Okay, so logging into Starfish, I'm pretty sure everyone here knows how to do that. I'm going to skip over this. The Starfish button in Canvas should be live in all course sections automatically. So from a student perspective, if we are guiding students in how to log into Starfish, that button should be on unless the faculty has gone in and removed it from their navigation menu. Okay, so navigating to the filters. You can get to filters from all of the different student channel menus. So this right here is a guide for the different options that we have when we're looking at student lists. So My Students is going to show each student only one time. It will be an unduplicated list of students. All counselors and our administrators have access to all students via our roles in Starfish. And so the last time I looked, I want to say we're at like 190,000 students that are actually coming into Starfish right now. So that's why filters become so important in terms of drilling down to the specific students that we want to look at. The tracking tab is going to show students with tracking items on their record. So students can be duplicated depending on how you have your filter set. If the student has more than one tracking item, they're going to show up more than once on the tracking channel because they'll show for every tracking item that is active or has ever been on the record if you're looking at active and resolved. The student surveys channel is going to show students who have responded to the surveys. And there's different filters options that we're not going to go into a lot of detail today on that screen, where we can actually look for student responses to individual questions and then be able to do outreach to them based on what they told us through their response in the survey. You can also apply other filters, but today's session is going to focus primarily on using filters within the My Students and the tracking channels of the student options. When you start to use filters, one of the most important things is to look to see whether you have any filters already applied. So in this screenshot, you can tell that there are filters applied. There's a little red check mark here, which tells me that I have filters selected. I can clear those filters just by clicking the X. This shows in the bar at the top of the My Students or tracking screen. When you click that, it's going to clear everything and give you a fresh start so that you can go back in and select the options that you want to apply for this time. A lot of us end up with tracking with the filter set to look at tracking items assigned to us. So then if we want to look at other things, we need to clear the filters and sort of start over so that we drill down to the student list that we want to see. Okay, so after you apply filters, you can go and test to make sure that it's showing you what you thought it should be showing you. So we can do this in a number of ways. You can open up the student folder, one of the student folders from your list. I usually do this with 3 or 4 just to make sure that it is pulling in what I thought I was telling it to pull in based on the filters that I selected. The overview tab is going to give you information based on courses, the cumulative GPA, academic standing, the ed goal. You can select a variety of these things. These are all attributes that come over into Starfish. So if you have applied attributes based on looking for students in a certain academic standing group, this is the screen where you can easily check that. You could also go check that against Report Manager and look at the registration priorities report and see whether the student is matching what you're seeing there. But you can also just check it in Starfish, but through the student folder. The info channel within the student folder is going to show you other things. So this is where you can look at the cohorts that the student is connected to. If you selected demographics, you could test to make sure that yes, the students that it's pulling in are in the demographic group that you wanted to look at. Active programs. You can also look at units enrolled for the specific term because it gives you the term status down here. You can also flip through from the student folder and look at degree plans if you've applied those filters. You can look for specific tracking items. You could even look for meeting history. So whether or not a student has met with a pathway counselor, and you can look for a specific time frame, whether they've had an appointment with a pathway counselor. So that's all by appointment type. So anyway, I encourage you to play around with it, apply filters, go test it so that you can make sure that you get comfortable with how to utilize these effectively. It just takes a little bit of practice to work with it. There's a lot of options as you go to apply tracking items. So what you're seeing right now is the additional filters dialog box. You can see all of the different options here that we can choose from. So from a tracking items option, you can select a specific type of tracking item, which from a counseling perspective, probably not super helpful. Generally, we want to look at a specific tracking item or tracking items that are assigned to me. Sometimes we're wanting to look at the ones that need review. Generally, when we're looking at students that we want to do outreach to, and we want to do that based on tracking items, we're going to have the status set to active. Because we want to look at what's active on the student record right now. We're not concerned about what might have been active on the student record in the past. But if you're wanting to look at something more holistically, maybe you set the status to all so that you do see everything, both active and resolved. The need review really comes into play most with to-do items. So things like the register for next semester, and the needs review is when the student has responded in Starfish and given us information about whether they plan on doing, whether they need additional help, what the status is of their progress on the to-do item that was assigned to them. From a counseling perspective, the best practice would be regularly check the tracking item tab for items that are assigned to you. And also for Readly, I know we use the academic standing items. Sometimes these are easy to fall off of our radar because we're not necessarily assigning those out through our triage process, and it's not part of our early alert triage, but those are items that we've raised as we work with students who we're clearing for registration based on their academic standing. And so we should be going back and looking at, did the student actually do what we advised them to do? And does that item still need to remain active? We've got several counselors who utilize this really, really well, and can give us some feedback on it. If you want to talk with someone, I can get you connected to them. You can also apply other filters to help us drill down to look at our specific programs. So in the case of looking at specific tracking items, a lot of times we're looking at the items that have been assigned to us for outreach. But I've had programs like EOPS ask me before, how do I know which one of our students are struggling, and how can I see all of the other things? We would do that through the tracking items tab, and we would use the EOPS organization or cohort to drill down to those students specifically, and then we can look for the specific items. And whether it doesn't matter, we can look for all active items to see any of our EOPS students that happen to have items raised, regardless of who they're assigned to in our triage process for follow-up. So it really does allow us to utilize this from a broad case management perspective, as well as a very focused case management perspective. Any questions so far before I move on to the next example? Okay. So selecting a cohort or organization, we have a lot of both organizations and cohorts in Starfish. Not all organizations are set up as a cohort, so you will see some differences between organization lists and the cohort list. In some cases, we take multiple organizations and we combine them to be one cohort. So for the example, Upward Bound, we have multiple Readly Upward Bound groupings from an organizational perspective, but we take each of those organizations and we make them into one cohort. So it allows that program to look at things from a cohort perspective, covering all Upward Bound students, or drilling down into the individual Upward Bound organization that a student happens to be connected to. We have similar things going on with like our veterans program. The guide that I dropped into the chat, and let me know if I need to drop it in there again. I know a few people may have joined after I dropped that into the chat. That lists every organization and cohort that was in our platform as of December. And we'll update that regularly so that it stays up to date, because as we build new programs, as we have new grants come on board, we are constantly building out what people have access to in order to be able to drill down to the specific student groups as we need to work with them in our colleges. And that's true for all of our colleges. This list is constantly growing. So you can type in, if you were to just scroll through this, it can be a very, very long list. You can type in and it will quick search. So for example, I could type in Mesa, or I could type in an art, music, English for the pathway. You can start typing in the words if you know the name of the organization that you want to drill down to, and it'll give you a list based on what you're typing in here. Any questions about cohorts and organizations filters? Okay, so this is going to become a much more important one as we work with the new legislation coming on board, and we're required to have comprehensive SEPs on our students. I know this has been a main focus already, but even more so with the new funding formula coming through. So students with degree plans, we can filter in a number of ways. We can look specifically for students who do not have a degree plan in Starfish, and we could target them based on that. We can also look for students who do have a plan in Starfish, but maybe whose plan has expired, which could give us a target list of students who we need to reach out to try to get them in to meet with a counselor and update that. We can look for those with approved plans and just look at our data of how many of our students are having approved plans in the system. From an outreach perspective, generally we're going to combine the degree plan filter along with other things. So applying a cohort or organization filter, sometimes an attribute filter. For example, from a pathway perspective, we would not want a pathway counselor trying to drill down just to their group without applying the pathway filter. But if you only apply the pathway filter, it's going to be pulling in students who are not necessarily enrolled. And if we want to target our outreach, we want to look at students that are connected to the pathway who are enrolled, who don't have a degree plan. So we would be applying multiple filters in order to drill down to the right group of students that are most pertinent for us to reach out to. This is one of the filters that I get probably the most questions about, just as people start playing with it and learning how to drill down and utilize the attributes in combination with the degree plan filter. But it helps a ton to just get in there and start playing with it and seeing how it works. What are your questions from this perspective? Questions? Okay. Okay, attributes. We also have a lot of attributes in the system. And one of the newest releases of functionality that Starfish made was logic coding with attributes. So this allows us to add multiple attributes and apply and or functionality to those attributes as we use them. So it really allows us to take these attributes and drill down in a lot of different ways than we used to be able to when we first started this and the logic coding did not apply. This is probably one of the things that has become most helpful as we look at doing our targeted texting campaigns and helping us really drill down to a small targeted number of students that's realistic for us to do outreach to. We used to have to do IR requests and things like that in order to help us drill down in this way, and the attributes with the logic coding has helped streamline that a lot. Once we apply these and it goes to our student list, we can then take that list and download it and work with it in a variety of ways. But learning how to use these attributes and what attributes are applicable to which scenario is really, really helpful. Danielle, you're asking, is there a way to see the actual attribute on the report generated? There is not. You mean like on the student list? Is that what you're asking?
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. Because I need to know what their GPA is, but it'll just tell me if it's below a certain amount, but it won't tell me actual GPA.
There are other reports in Report Manager that you can use to get total units, GPA, cum GPA, based on the Starfish organizations.
Cool. Okay. Report Manager.
So
Okay.
it's in Report Manager in the counseling folder.
Okay.
If we have time at the end, I can pull that up and show you.
Cool. Thank you.
Yep. No, Starfish from the attribute perspective, it's just going to give you the student list that we see on the screen. It's not going to tell you what filters you applied when you created that list. So if you're saving it, it's really important that you save it in a way that helps you know what that list actually was. If you click on this little information icon under the logic, it is going to open up this cheat sheet. So when I first started playing around with the logic coding and attributes, I referred to this all the time. As you add each attribute that you want to apply, so you add an attribute by clicking this little add attribute button, and then you select the attribute that you want from the drop down. This is a screenshot of what that looks like. It automatically sets it up as an and relationship. So it'll look for attribute 1 and attribute 2. And if you apply 3 or 4 attributes, it's going to go and. So it'll look for students that have all of those things applicable to them. But sometimes we want to look at attribute 1 and or attribute 2 or 3. And so this coding allows us to group using parentheses and this smart coding so that you can really drill down into what you need. And it just takes practice playing around with it. It seems more daunting looking at this guide than it actually is when you start playing with it. But that's where playing with it and then testing it to make sure it is pulling in who you thought it should is really important. The attributes list in the guide, it gives you all of the specifics. So each one of these attributes, it actually gives you an assigned to student, not assigned to student, or a specific value. Depending on how the attribute is set up, sometimes the specific value is not even applicable because it's an attribute that either is assigned to the student or not assigned to a student. It's not something that there is a specific value difference. Other times you need to know what value to actually put in there. Like in the case of looking at ethnicities and things like that, you would have to actually know what wording to put in to pull in the different ethnicities. That is all in the filters guide when it comes to the attributes. So I tried to list all of the little nuances like that. In general, you don't want to filter by term because the way we're bringing information over into Starfish, these attributes are not term-based. We're only bringing in attributes based on what's applicable to the student right now. And so if you select the term, filter by term, it's actually may result in you not getting anything at all because the attributes are not term-based. It's based on what's true on the student record right now, not what was true within a certain term, especially looking historically. So this is really most applicable for applying filters to look at our current group of students, what's true on their record right now for what we might want to do in terms of outreach and case management, rather than trying to use this as a historical data collection, looking at information over time. If we want to look at things over time, that's where we need to go back and use some of the things that are in Report Manager for us to pull in information or work with IR in order to get that historical overview. Any questions about attributes? Okay. So we're going to go into some specific examples that are probably some of the most common ones that we help people with. So identifying enrolled students. The most common way to do that is to use the term options. So we have 3 different enrolled attributes: fall, spring, and summer. Um, and so if we select our cohort or organization that we want to look at, and then we go apply an attribute filter, if I wanted to look at who is enrolled for spring 25, I'm going to look at spring total enrolled units. Once fall 25, summer and fall 25 registration opens up, the system will allow me to look at who's registered for summer 25, who's registered for fall 25. If I were to select those right now, it's actually going to look at the historical terms because registration for the future hasn't opened up. So it's really important to those details are in the attribute guide. But if you just think from a perspective of once registration opens up for that next term, these attributes are going to jump to the future. If registration has not opened up, it's looking at the historical. Questions about the enrolled student attribute and identifying those?
Samara, I have a question. So with counseling, right, we'll use sometimes the courses to view the currently enrolled students. But say I'm in, December and I'm looking to see if a student has registered for spring.
Yeah.
Is there a way to view class schedule for spring if the term technically hasn't started, right? The student's enrolled,
So
But it
you
has.
can, so it depends on the timing. In terms of seeing it on the courses tab, we don't bring those over to show in the courses tab until we get very close to the start of the next term. You can obviously look that up in the specific schedule up in Colleague, but it won't show in Starfish super early. Like when we start summer fall registration in March, it's not going to show those courses. It will on Degree Planner, but it's not going to show it from the courses tab in March. But as we get closer to May, it will show up. But this attribute, you can look as soon as registration for that next term begins, you can be using this attribute to look for students who are enrolled for the next term or who are not enrolled for the next term.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay. This is one of the other things. So there are reports in Report Manager where we can look at students that have a specific program built on their degree, Starfish degree plan. This attribute is looking at students who have a specific program active on their record. So this is not related to Degree Planner and programs that are built into the degree plan. Theoretically, they should match. In a perfect world, we would want to look at students with a specific program active on their record, and we would see that that's what their SEP is built for. But this specific attribute is looking for, does the student have a specific program on their record? And there's some weird nuances with this one when you enter it. You have to bookend it on both sides with the percentage mark. That's a weird computer programming thing that I don't even know why. I don't know how to explain that it matters, but it does. It will not pull everyone in unless you bookend it. Based on the testing I've done, if you don't bookend it, it only pulls in students with that as the first program listed on their record, which generally is not what we're wanting to look at. So you need to know what your major codes are at your college. For Readly, we do have a list of those that we share out with counselors. But from a pathway perspective, this becomes really helpful when we're wanting to do targeted communication with students who have a specific program active on their record. We can go search for those students using this attribute. You can apply a variety of other filters as needed, as appropriate, and get that target list of students. If you're wanting to know what is living on the student ed plan, that's where we have to use the reports in Report Manager, because that'll allow us to drill down to the specific courses that are built on that student's education plan. This is just looking for the active program on the student record. So if it is on the student record in Colleague with no end date, it's an active program on their record, you can use this attribute to identify those. Questions about this one? Okay. This is another one, again, related to our funding formula that's going to become more important for us to utilize in our outreach efforts. So this is helping us identify students who have or have not completed math and or English, transfer level math and or English. This attribute is recognizing trellics that are on the student's record. So whether they've completed the transfer level math or English course or have a related TRELIC on their record for clearing that, the system will recognize it. And we can search for whether the student has completed it, whether they are currently enrolled in it, or whether they have not completed it. So there are 3 specific values that we can search for when it comes to this. And again, you can apply this with a variety of other filters. You could apply a degree, specific program attribute filter. You could also apply a academic standing filter if you wanted to. You can look for a specific cohort and organization, but you can really use this to drill down and get very, very specific to look at who has or has not. Any questions about this one? Okay, this is one that Danielle and I have talked a little bit about utilizing when it comes to contextualized English course offerings to help us drill down to students that are part of a specific program who have not completed and are not enrolled in a transfer level English, and being able to drill down to them to distribute information specifically to those students to market those contextualized courses. Okay. Another counseling related one, AB 928. We bring this over so that we can have a way of identifying students based on additional filters who we may need to do outreach to and or review the record to code exceptions in terms of compliance with the AB 928. There are also AB 928 reports and report manager that allow us to identify the students who indicated that they were not able to select the major that they wanted at time of application. But this is helping us be able to look at those students with a specific education goal who don't have an exception applied. And again, we can apply additional filters. So the screenshot here is looking at spring enrolled students who don't have an exception, who have the ed goal that would require an exception. Okay. So any questions about this? Okay. Okay, so bigger picture, some of the things to consider. From a counseling perspective, we are all in relationships that give us access to view all students in Starfish. So understanding your different roles and whether that role is linked to all students or linked to a specific group of students only is really important. And if you have questions about that, just reach out to one of your Starfish team members and we will help you understand it. When we're doing outreach, we filtered down these lists. The best practice really is to complete that outreach in a personalized way, whether that's sending individual emails, doing text campaigns, or doing phone calls. We don't want to send that outreach through Starfish generally. There's extremely limited functionality in terms of the messaging that we can send through Starfish. So we can't include announcements or like attachments. The messaging that we send is just like a block paragraph, so it's not very student friendly and just pretty to look at. So that's why we want to use the filters to help us drill down to the students, but then potentially use other platforms, other ways of reaching out to the student rather than just sending a bulk message to the students through Starfish. Any questions about these things? Or best practices that you guys have run into that you might be willing to share?
Samara, I just want to add, so we shouldn't use Starfish for messaging like you're saying, but we can definitely use the contact information that is included within Starfish for each of the students, right? Because I know we use that in the alerts.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And when you download, if you download the list, so counselors have the ability to download the lists after we've applied these filters, it will give you the students' phone numbers, it will give you the students' emails, it'll give you their names. So like you can take those things and do mail merges, or take those things and work with Kia and Ramon to do a texting campaign out to the students. But it gives you all of the things that you might need to do that outreach in other ways. When it comes to like our early alert outreach, you might just be filtering down to the students that are applied to you, and you're not going to need to download it because you're just going to work through your list and put in your comments as you do the outreach for each of the items. For the students, we want to make sure that you're updating those types of comments. But from broader case management perspectives, if we're wanting to do SEP outreach and things like that, you can download that list and work with it in a variety of ways.
So Mara, this is Sergio. In the meeting history for students, does it show students who actually scheduled an appointment and showed up to the appointment, or just the one who scheduled an appointment?
So that is an enhancement request that we have out there, is the ability to filter by either attended or not attended. Right now, it's just going to give you the list of students who have had an appointment scheduled with that meeting type or with that specific reason, if you select a specific reason within the meeting type options. And again, you can apply a time frame filter to that as well if you wanted. But it's not going to show you whether they attended or not.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So that is the end of like our structured presentation. For all of the Readly counselors, the Starfish Guide to Using Filters is posted on the intranet. For other campuses, it's available through your Starfish lead. We now have a district-wide Starfish help set up. So this can be the email that you're sending any questions to, and there's a small team of us that manage that. You can also go into the Starfish help resources through your navigation menu, and there is actually filter guides and a lot of information that comes directly from EAB about how to utilize filters. It just doesn't give you our specific attribute organization information. That's where our guide is customized specifically for what is built into our system. But their resources are excellent in terms of understanding just working with filters in general. Okay, let's see. Danielle, you wanted an example of the reports and report manager. So let me get that up here just a second.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, so if we go to report manager, oh, hold on, I have to turn on my VPN. Oh, maybe not. There we go. Okay, if we go to the counseling folder, there are several in here that will be helpful. So the student GPA for Starfish organizations and the student sections for Starfish organizations allow you to use any student org that is coming into Starfish and search for, it'll give you a summary of information. First, so for example, the student GPA for organizations, obviously there is not going to be anything posted for future terms. It does default to select everything, but there's not going to be any data there for future terms that don't have GPA related data. But I could go in and select these, and then I can come in and select any of these. And it will bring up a list of students. I am going to stop the recording at this point because it is going to show student data and I want them to be able to post this on the intranet. The other report that I'm going to show in just a moment is the student sections for Starfish organizations. This one allows you to look at enrollment for a specific term, and you can look for a variety of statuses. In general, we're wanting to look at who has the course either added or enrolled, depending on whether they added it prior to the start of the term or added it after the start of the term. So enrolled students, and then you can select the org and you can look at all courses that those students happen to be enrolled in, or you can look for a specific course. So this one becomes really helpful in identifying students who might, who we might want to offer group tutoring to and things like that. I'm gonna stop the recording though, just a second, so that I can actually process one of these for you guys. Maybe.